So today we're going to be looking at the astrology chart of King Charles, but we're going to take a specific look at it today. In Vedic astrology, there's this concept of karma. So your astrology chart and the layout of your astrology chart is essentially a roadmap of the type of karma you're going to experience throughout your life. Well, there's different types of karma. There's your personal karma, which you may have received due to past actions, thoughts, words, and deeds in past lives. And then there's a collective karma, as in nation states, communities. But today we're going to be taking a look more specifically at ancestral karma. So the karma that we inherit through our family lines. And that's what we're going to be looking at using King Charles' astrology chart today. So for those of you that are interested, please stick around. If you're new to my channel, please like and subscribe. I practice Vedic sidereal astrology, of course, my own interpretation of it. And if you're interested in your own personal private reading, check down below for details. And also, I want to add that this reading is for entertainment purposes only. This is my interpretation of the astrological energies and the karma. So it's a spiritually based type of reading. So let's go ahead and talk about some of the karmas we're going to be looking at as far as King Charles astrology chart goes. So there's generational karma. It's patterns of karma that are inherited through the lineage. We all have it. So we all have this ancestral karma. That's why you see things, happen in family lines, like particular sets of behavior or, even like uh, bizarre things that you see in family lines or addictions or things like that. You can see that in family lines. The ancestral karma is usually tied to your forebears and the homeland. So also the homeland you're from, the cultural background, the root people you belong to has a particular set of karma as well. We're going to be looking at some of the karmic challenges. Right now, there's a lot of videos on this idea of generational curses or generational traumas that get passed down through ancestral lines. That's a good topic to discuss. We're going to just talk about some indications there in the astrology chart that could show like what we would perceive as a generational curse. And then we'll look at the transformative potential. Now, all of the karma is not necessarily meant to punish, King Charles or any of us. So let's go ahead and talk about the first part of the astrology chart, which is we usually like to look at the moon and we usually like to look at the ascendant. I'm going to give you a quick look at the astrology chart of King Charles for a moment. In Vedic sidereal astrology, he's a Cancer ascendant. And the thing about it is because he's Cancer ascendant, right away we know that family values and ancestry is important because Cancer is one of those signs that they're very tied to the ancestors. They're very tied to tradition. And we're going to see that even more with Saturn being in the second house. So Saturn in the second house could show a very traditional family, although the family line or the ancestral line might be very restricted and very limited in their movement. And that's going to be one of the things that King Charles is trying to rectify in this lifetime, is trying to bring innovation to a very old institution. So Cancer ascendant, they're usually very family oriented, very connected to ancestors. They have an emotional, intuitive kind of connection. And there's this deep responsibility for preserving the lineage and heritage, vulnerability to ancestral emotional burdens. Cancer people tend to be, wear their hearts on their sleeve. They tend to be a lot more emotional. And then if we look at where the moon is in the astrology chart, you'll notice it's in the 10th house of, and I don't know if it's Capricorn. I think it says Capricorn there, but let me pull up the chart. You'll see that that's, the family reputation with moon being in the 10th house of Aries. I'm right. It's Aries. That this idea of the family legacy, the family reputation is going to be very important. And moon represents mother. So there's a lot of mother karma there. There's a lot of wanting to emulate his mother, the queen. The mother, the queen may have been larger than life with Rahu being next to the moon. So there's a lot of power there. There's a lot of dignity that he's trying to uphold in this I was going to say administration, but with this being king. Let's talk about the next factor. So, we want to look at the ascendant, we want to look at moon. So we know that the family dignity is going to be very important with moon in the 10th house. The next thing we want to look at is we're going to look at the fourth house. And, right off the right away, you might think, why would the fourth house represent family karma? It usually represents things like real estate. It usually represents like moving house, vehicles, mother. But that's why it's very connected to your mother. But the fourth house, and I want to point this out, is your root culture. So whatever the root culture of your people are, whatever cultural ethnic group you belong to, that's going to be fourth house moon. That's going to be those cultural traditions that are passed down. So it's important to look at the fourth house. There's a few things going on in the fourth house of King Charles. So if we're looking at like the people, the ancestral people that King Charles comes from, let's go take a look at that. He's got a few things going there. So he's got K2, he's got Mercury, and he's got Sun, which is debilitated. So, for example, with Sun being debilitated in the sign of Libra in the fourth house, could show that, some of his ancestors, you may have misapplied power, may have misused power because the Sun is representative of power. So there could have been a lot of mistakes there with some of the ancestors, and he could be here as kind of, and I think this is why we're all here, to try to help rectify some of that karma, to help try to heal some of that karma. Also, K2's there. So there could have been issues of abandonment within his family line. If we research the history of the kings of England, you'll see that, a lot of times things were very, there was the crown was changing hands through different wars and different battles they had through different times. It belonged to a certain house, like the Tudors or like other houses, and there was a lot of wars. There was the War of the Roses. So there it was a lot of loss in the ancestral line, with K2 being in the fourth house. It's kind of a loss there. But K2 in the fourth house can also kind of be a sense of detachment as well. So let me pull up the slide again on that one. So definitely, though, that fourth house, 10th house axis shows there's a lot of responsibility there. Past life debts and detachment from personal happiness indicates karmic sacrifices related to homeland and family. One thing K2 can represent is sacrifice, letting go. So there are sacrifices being made. Maybe King Charles is going to have to be the one to make those sacrifices. There may be things because of the political nature of this modern time where he's going to have to make a lot of concessions that maybe prior kings and queens didn't have to make concessions about. So he's maybe having to try to balance that with the modern political, what's going on politically. Mercury, intellectual and communicative inheritance, but also family misunderstandings, especially because Mercury is with K2. So there could be a lot of family misunderstandings there. We did talk about the 10th house already, but that's all tied to emotional connection to public duty. This is very important to King Charles. Okay. And this is something that probably, with Moon being in the 10th house, was drilled to him by his mother. Okay. So we can definitely say a lot of that he was very much prepped for this role to be king. Very, very important. Rahu is there though. So that's the thing we got to look at with Rahu being in the 10th house next to Moon. If Moon was just there by itself, it would be a little bit easier to talk about, but Rahu's there, and Rahu, there is, Rahu's known as a karmic node. It's known as a demon in the ancient lore. It's a trickster. So there's a lot of, there's kind of a little bit of a shadow there in the 10th house. Okay. There's a little bit of a shadow. There's a lot of hidden things that we probably don't know. And there might be some hidden things in the family history with the leadership, because Rahu can be kind of a hidden type of situation. So karmic imbalances. Now, for example, people bring up sometimes, the royal family. A lot of people consider there's somewhat of a, ethical problem there, because if we go back into the past hundreds of years ago, the royal family may have, received a lot of funds, or based on the ancient practices of exploitation of other nations and things like that. So there's that kind of legacy there with Rahu in the 10th house. There's something where, maybe the leadership wasn't necessarily always done in a perfectly like noble way or totally honest way. So like having to do with like exploitation or colonization, those kind of issues coming into it with Rahu. So there's a little bit of a negative, like I said, with Rahu's kind of seen as the devil. And so there's a little bit of difficult family history, and we're going to see that more with Saturn in the second house. There's some difficult family history there. The second house analysis is going to be Saturn in the second house, and the second house has to do with the generational wealth and also your experience of your family, by the way. So let's look at that. Now, usually if Saturn's in the second house is usually the first thing I like to look at as far as like your karmic inheritance from your family line. So when you have Saturn there, it's already showing there's a lot of difficulties there, and not to mention it's the eighth lord. So there's a lot of family secrets in the family history. There's some scandals there because the eighth house can represent scandals, things like that. The Saturn in the second house could represent a culture of silence, kind of like don't speak. You could be punished if you speak too much truth. That's what it represents. If you speak out too truthfully, you could be punished, because that's what Saturn represents, is kind of like keeping your mouth shut, not saying certain things. And also, Saturn in the second house can also contribute to this idea of like a difficult childhood. And I remember he went to, and you'll have to remind me of what the school was called, but King Charles went to that school that his father, Prince Philip, went to. And Prince Philip like loved it. That's why he wanted King Charles to go. And, he had this horrible time. King Charles says it was like, you know, it was like not, he didn't like it at all. Even though Prince Philip had this wonderful experience where it helped him a lot going to that school in Scotland. So there could be a lot of difficulty there. Saturn in the second house can also represent, a lot of times it can represent like skeletons in the closet, things that we just don't talk about that happened in the past. Again, it's the eighth house secrets in the past. But definitely, you know, as far as money goes, because the second house represents money, there's a indication in this lifetime that he's supposed to be more frugal than the past family members. So in generations prior, maybe they could be a little bit more, maybe there wasn't as many questions about how they spent their wealth, or questions about their wealth. And in this lifetime, it's more methodical. He's got to think about being frugal and setting an example, because Saturn there loves austerity. Saturn likes austerity. Now, to the average person, it definitely does not look like King Charles is living in austerity, but in his, in what he represents in his society, it might be that he's more, austere or more streamlined than some of the past royals. That's the thing to consider, is we have to kind of look at him compared to his family. Okay. But Saturn in the second house can always represent kind of the ghost from the past. And some bad karma basically from the past. There's some negative karma there with Saturn in the second house. There's somewhat of a negative legacy, karmic legacy, that he might have to kind of try to pay in subtle ways. Okay. And let's go ahead and pull up the slideshow. So definitely he's got a big karmic inheritance just with that one placement alone. Karmic challenges are related to inherited wealth and ethical use of resources. Restructuring family values tied to legacy and wealth suggests austerity and the need for moral responsibility. And I remember, and I know some of you have criticized me about watching The Crown, but I remember in that show, The Crown, they were trying to portray King Charles as he was trying to save more money, I guess, than, some of the other royal family members. So maybe that's true. Let me know down below. Now we got to look at the fifth house. We're going to look at that for a moment. Now you might be wondering, why would we look at the fifth house? And the reason why we do is because the fifth house represents children. So it's that idea of your descendants, your posterity. So that's another thing when we're looking at family lines or family, family inheritance. So we got to look at what is in the fifth house, because this is part of this overall family generational patterns if we want to think about it. So let's go pull up the chart for a moment. And we know there's probably something there, we're going to pull it up in a second here, but we look at what's going on with Prince William and Prince Harry. There's something there, And if we look at the fifth house, we got Mars there. So we got Mars there. Mars, it's not a bad planet for Cancer ascendant, so it's not a bad planet. But Mars can be restlessness, it can be some conflict with the children, it can represent a very forward moving, innovative type of posterity. So Prince William, when he becomes king, he could be a very innovative type of king, he could be a very forward thinking type of king, because Mars represents that innovation, it represents that forward movement, where Saturn is the opposite. Okay. So even this transition, even though if we look at Prince William's chart, he does have Saturn I believe Saturn in the second house. I'd have to look that up again. But he does have some traditional values there. Or Saturn in the 10th house. Saturn in the 10th house. He is traditional, but he is being forced with everything going on, like, AI, automation, the politics changing. He is being forced to innovate. So we have a very forward moving, but very competitive. Could be, the Mars could represent the Prince Harry and Prince William, because it's kind of this competitive. Maybe we're not always getting along. It is in the sign of, and let me bring that up again. Was it the sign of Scorpio? So sign of Scorpio can always be kind of deep seated, issues there, are deep seated resentments. So you have to be careful about that. Let's pull up the slide again. So there's a strong Mars impact, strong drive to uphold or transform the family legacy. So he wants to really have this forward moving legacy with Prince William and Prince Harry. Indicates intensity and ambition in managing the royal legacy. So the fifth house is the legacy. What kind of legacy does King Charles want to be known for? Well, he wants to be seen as this change agent in the family. So that's quite interesting. The sixth house is the last house we're going to be looking at. And the reason why we're looking at the sixth house, and let me show you. Normally, we wouldn't necessarily look at that in relation to family karma, but if we take a look at what's in the sixth house, you'll see that it's the ninth lord. So Jupiter's the ninth lord, and the ninth lord can represent ancestors, grandparents. So it's connected to family and father figures, religion. So the ninth house is very much connected to your family, the ninth house and the fourth house and the second house. So we have the ninth lord in the sixth house, which could represent kind of how does he rectify all this family karma. So there is some negative family karma there, and it's going to be through the sixth house of service. This is the key to how he balances this generational karma. Okay, so the more he serves, the more he's going to be able to balance the karmic slate, okay, with his family line. Because like I said before, when we're born into these family lines, we're meant to help the family line. We're meant to heal the family line, to improve the karma of the family line. So let's go pull the chart up on there. So the sixth house can represent debts, conflicts, and service. Now, on a more mundane level, it can represent the health issues, but we're focused on the family karma here. Okay. So the sixth house represents debts, negative karmic debts. So Jupiter there showing, okay, if we do service, we can overcome these debts. So opportunities for spiritual growth through ethical service indicates moral and legal challenges tied to generational karma. Strong placement for resolving conflicts through wisdom. So also his sense of, religion is tied to this. So, religious service, or, in traditional astrology, the ninth house would be like doing puja, saying prayers, the kind of religious way of absolving yourself of karma. So that would be indicative of Jupiter being in the ninth house. Now I'm going to pull up the chart one more time just to kind of do an overview again. So we're going to want to look at, when we look at ancestral karma, the other thing, first thing you're going to want to look at one more time is you're always going to want to look at the second house, because this is literally like your bloodline, your family that you're born into. The DNA is like the second house. Okay. That's your family, like, upbringing there. You're going to want to look at the fourth house, because that's like the ethnic people that you belong to, the homeland. Okay. Then you're going to want to look at things like the ninth house, because that can represent ancestors, parents, things like that. So you notice that the fourth house represents, mother, and then the ninth house represents father, but they also represent other family members as well. You're going to want to look at the moon placement, because the moon placement can represent like the cultural people you belong to. And this can be way back when we're talking about cultural people. This could be like your root people from like 2000 years ago. You know what I mean? Like if you go back in your family history, when we talk about like, because if we look at what's happened on the planet, there's been so many migrations that happen. So like the moon can represent literally, if you go back thousands of years. Fifth house you're going to want to look at, because that's posterity. The other thing you want to look at as far as your ancestors, and we didn't really probe too much into this, is the 12th house. Okay, the 12th house is also ancestral. He doesn't have any planets in the 12th house. But one of the things you can look at if you have a planet in the 12th house is it can show what type of ancestral spirits, depending on the character of the planet, like who are your ancestral guides in this lifetime. So if you have planets there, it shows that there's a very strong connection to ancestors that are operative in, if you want to call it, the astral realm. So they're operative on the other side of the veil. They're operative and they're operating in your life. They're sending you intuitions actively if you have planets in the 12th house. So make sure you check that out. So if we look at where the 12th Lord is in King Charles's chart, let me clean up. That would be Mercury. So the 12th Lord, Mercury. So fourth house, very much, very much rooted in the land, uh, you know, very much rooted in the soil there of England. Very much, this could be one of the reasons why or King Charles, I'm sorry, I was about to say Prince Charles, King Charles is involved with things like conservation, very concerned about that, because he's got this ancestral connection to the land. Okay, so he wants to see the land preserved, with the 12th Lord being in the fourth house. Okay, so there's this idea of wanting to protect the land, even if it's at personal expense, because the 12th house can represent losses. So this is interesting. Now, one of the ways to rectify some of your family karma is you can look at your astrology chart to try to figure out, how would you rectify that karma. You're always going to want to look at like where the ninth Lord is in your astrology chart, because the ninth Lord shows your purpose, your dharma. So anytime you're following that path of dharma, path of purpose, it can show a way of absolving yourself of some of that ancestral karma. You want to look at the 12th Lord. How do you appease the spirits? How do you appease the ancestors? That's all important when you're looking at an astrology chart. So let me know what you think down below in the comments, and let me know if you have any requests for videos. Take care, and I will see you all in the next video.